Alright, stop everything right now. You think all 7 BTS members learn choreography at the same speed? You think Idol, Fake Love, and Mic Drop just magically clicked for everyone on day 1? Oh, you're so wrong. Behind every flawless stage are endless practice hours, and not every member picks up new moves the same way. So who struggles the most when a brand new routine drops? Is it the member you'd least expect? Does being a main dancer mean you learn fastest? 7 members, 7 spots. Let's find out who sits at number 1. Number 7. J-Hope. Okay, let's kick this list off with someone who, and honestly, this should surprise absolutely nobody, lands at the very bottom of this ranking, meaning he is the easiest member in BTS to teach a brand new dance routine. We're talking about Jung Hoseok, the one and only J-Hope. BTS's main dancer, dance leader, and the human being who literally moves like choreography was pre-installed into his DNA before he was even born. And look, I know what you're thinking. Well, duh, of course J-Hope is the easiest to teach, he's the dance guy. But hold on, because the level of how fast this man absorbs new movement is genuinely insane. And when you really dig into the details, you realize it's not just talent, it's a whole lifetime of preparation that makes him the absolute fastest learner in that practice room. Let's rewind. Before J-Hope was ever J-Hope of BTS, he was a street dancer from Gwangju, South Korea, performing under dance crews and winning competitions at a regional and national level. We're talking about a kid who started popping, locking, and freestyling when most boys his age were just figuring out how to ride a bike properly. He was part of a street dance team called Neuron and actually won a national dance competition in 2008. Let that sink in. Before he even auditioned for Big Hit Entertainment, before he ever dreamed of becoming an idol, he was already a champion-level dancer. That foundation, that is everything, because when you've spent your entire childhood and teenage years training your body to react to rhythm instinctively, learning a new K-pop choreography isn't a mountain to climb, it's a walk in the park. Now here's where it gets really fascinating. Multiple choreographers who have worked with BTS over the years, including the legendary Son Sung-duk, BTS's performance director, have confirmed in behind-the-scenes content and interviews that J-Hope is almost always the first member to fully memorize and execute a new choreography. We're not talking about, he kinda gets the general shape of the moves. No. We're talking about full execution, precise angles, sharp isolations, correct timing, musicality, facial expressions, everything, often within the first few rounds of learning. In multiple Bangtan bombs and practice room footage, you can literally see J-Hope watching the choreographer demonstrate a sequence maybe once or twice, and then his body just reproduces it. It's almost eerie, like his muscles have their own set of eyes. And here's a detail that a lot of casual fans miss. J-Hope doesn't just learn fast for himself, he then becomes the teacher for the other members. This is a huge deal. Son Sung-duk has openly talked about how J-Hope serves as a bridge between the choreography team and the rest of BTS. After the official teaching session ends, J-Hope stays behind or pulls members aside to break down sections they're struggling with. He adjusts his teaching style depending on who he's helping, sometimes counting beats differently, sometimes slowing the tempo, sometimes physically guiding a member's arm or leg into the correct position. He did this extensively during the Idol era, which had one of BTS's most complex choreographies ever, with all those traditional Korean dance elements mixed into hip-hop. Members like RM and Jin have both publicly thanked J-Hope multiple times for staying late to help them nail difficult sections. But let's talk about something even deeper. J-Hope's understanding of dance goes way beyond memorization. He has an almost academic-level comprehension of different dance styles. He can switch between hip-hop, popping, locking, contemporary, urban choreography, and even house dance with a fluidity that most professional dancers would envy. Why does this matter for learning speed? Because when a choreographer introduces a new move that's rooted in, say, a locking technique or a popping isolation, J-Hope doesn't need it explained from scratch. His brain already has a library of movement vocabulary stored up from years of cross-style training. It's like trying to teach a new English word to someone who already speaks 5 languages. The neural pathways are already built, the connections are already there, and the new information just slots right into place. There's a legendary moment during the butter practice sessions, captured in a behind-the-scenes video, where the choreographer walks through a particularly groovy, smooth section of the choreography, and while other members are still processing the sequence, J-Hope is already doing it full out with added style and flavor, not just matching the choreography, but elevating it, adding his own subtle textures that make the movement look even better. That's the difference between someone who learns dance and someone who lives dance. J-Hope doesn't approach new choreography as something foreign to decode. He approaches it as a conversation with the music, and his body already speaks that language fluently. And if you need one more piece of evidence, just look at his solo work. Chicken Noodle Soup with Becky G, his solo tracks from Jack in the Box, and Hope on the Street. Every single one of those projects involved learning entirely new choreographic styles, sometimes from global choreographers he'd never worked with before. And every single time, the feedback from those choreographers was the same. He picks it up faster than anyone I've ever worked with. That's not fan hype. That's professional testimony from people who teach dance for a living. Number 6. Jimin. Now we're stepping into territory that might raise a few eyebrows because the member sitting at number 6, the second easiest BTS member to teach a brand new choreography, is none other than Park Jimin, BTS's other main dancer, the man whose movements are so fluid, so mesmerizing, so emotionally charged that fans have literally described watching him dance as a spiritual experience. And I know, some of you are already typing in the comments, wait, Jimin is a main dancer, why isn't he tied with J-Hope at the bottom? And that, my friend, is exactly the kind of question that makes this ranking so fascinating, because being an incredible dancer and being a fast learner of new choreography are two very different skills. And the gap between Jimin and J-Hope in terms of learning speed, while small, is real, documented, and rooted in something deeply interesting about how Jimin's body and brain process movement. Let's start from the beginning, because Jimin's dance background is fundamentally different from J-Hope's, and that difference matters more than you think. While J-Hope grew up in the world of street dance, popping, locking, freestyle, battling, Jimin came from the world of contemporary dance. He attended the Busan High School of Arts as a top student in the modern dance department. Contemporary dance is beautiful, it's expressive, it's deeply emotional, but it's also a completely different beast from the sharp, rhythm-locked, groove-based choreography that dominates K-pop. Contemporary is about flow, about breath, about using your body to tell a story through sustained, elongated movement. K-pop choreography, on the other hand, is about hitting beats hard, isolating body parts with surgical precision, and executing rapid-fire sequences that change direction every 2 counts. So when Jimin first entered Big Hit as a trainee, he actually had to undergo a significant rewiring of his movement instincts. His body naturally wanted to flow and stretch and breathe through every move, but the choreographers needed him to snap, lock, and punch. Now here's the thing, Jimin absolutely conquered that transition. There's no debate about that. By the time BTS debuted with No More Dream in 2013, Jimin was already one of the sharpest movers in the group. But that contemporary dance foundation still subtly affects how he learns new choreography, even to this day. Multiple behind-the-scenes videos show a consistent pattern. When a new routine is introduced, Jimin's first instinct is to absorb the feeling of the movement before locking down the technical precision. He internalizes the emotion, the weight, the texture of the choreography first, and then sharpens the details. This is classic contemporary dance training at work. You learn the intent before you learn the mechanics. J-Hope, by contrast, tends to lock in the exact mechanics first and then layer emotion on top. Neither approach is wrong, but J-Hope's method tends to produce a complete version of the choreography slightly faster because K-pop routines are fundamentally built on mechanical precision. And there's another layer to this that's absolutely fascinating. Jimin is a notorious perfectionist, and that perfectionism actually slows down his finished speed, even though his raw learning speed is elite. There are so many moments captured in Bangtan Bombs, rehearsal footage, and Run BTS episodes where Jimin has clearly already learned the choreography, like he knows the moves, his body is doing the right things, but he refuses to call it done because a hand angle is 2 degrees off, or his head turn doesn't have enough snap, or his weight transfer between steps doesn't feel organic enough. During the Black Swan era, which had an incredibly contemporary-influenced choreography that you'd think would be Jimin's absolute comfort zone, he was spotted in the practice room running the same 8-count section over and over again late into the night. Not because he couldn't do it, but because he wanted it to be perfect. He wanted every single frame of that movement to look like a painting. Son Songduk once said in a behind-the-scenes feature that Jimin's biggest strength and his biggest challenge are the same thing. He will never, ever settle for good enough. Let's talk about Lie, his solo track from the Wings album. The choreography for Lie is widely regarded as one of the most physically and technically demanding solo stages in all of K-pop. It blends contemporary, modern, and hip-hop elements into a routine that requires insane core strength, flexibility, and emotional projection simultaneously. Jimin worked with choreographers to develop this piece, and by all accounts, the learning process was intense, not because he couldn't do the moves, but because he kept pushing for revisions, kept asking for harder variations, kept demanding that the choreography match the emotional depth of the song's lyrics about feeling trapped and deceived. That's Jimin in a nutshell. He doesn't just want to perform the dance, he wants to become the dance, and that internal standard adds extra time to his process. Number 5. Jungkook. Alright, if you guessed this one correctly, give yourself a round of applause, because sitting right here at number 5, the third easiest member to teach new choreography, is the one and only Jungkook, BTS's youngest member, the legendary Golden Maknae, the guy who is so annoyingly good at literally everything he tries that the other 6 members have openly joked about wanting to hate him for it. And here's what makes Jungkook's placement on this list so absolutely wild. He is not a main dancer. He has never held that official title. His primary positions are main vocalist and lead dancer. And yet, when a brand new choreography drops in that practice room, Jungkook picks it up at a speed that has left actual professional choreographers scratching their heads in disbelief. Not because he has decades of specialized dance training, not because he grew up in a dance crew or attended a performing arts school for dance, but because Jungkook possesses something that you genuinely cannot teach, something that no amount of training can replicate, a freakishly gifted body that just absorbs physical movement like a sponge absorbs water. Let's talk about what makes Jungkook such an absurdly fast learner, because it's not what most people think. A lot of fans attribute his learning speed to hard work or dedication, and while those things are absolutely true, Jungkook is one of the hardest working idols in the entire industry. They don't fully explain the phenomenon. The real answer lies in something called kinesthetic intelligence, which is essentially your body's natural ability to observe a physical movement and then reproduce it accurately without extensive repetition. Most people need to see a move demonstrated multiple times, break it down into smaller parts, practice each part separately, and then slowly piece everything together. Jungkook, he watches it once, maybe twice, and his body just does it. Not perfectly on the first try, sure, but close enough that choreographers have openly expressed shock. In a behind-the-scenes video during the On era, one of BTS's most physically demanding choreographies ever, with those insane marching formations, the powerful stomps, and the complex level changes, there's a moment where Son Sung-duk is teaching a new section, and while several members are still processing the counts, Jungkook is already running it at nearly full speed in the back, not showing off, not trying to be first. His body just automatically locked in. And this is where we need to talk about Jungkook's athletic background, because it plays a massive role in why he learns choreography so fast. Before and during his time as a trainee, Jungkook was into everything physical: taekwondo, boxing, working out, swimming, you name it. His body is naturally coordinated in a way that transcends any single discipline. When you have that kind of broad athletic foundation, your proprioception, your body's internal sense of where your limbs are in space without looking at them, becomes incredibly refined. That's why Jungkook can watch a choreographer do a complex arm sequence while simultaneously executing footwork, and his brain doesn't short-circuit trying to process both things at once. For most people, multi-limb coordination at high speed requires significant practice. For Jungkook, it's almost second nature. There's a moment from the Dionysus rehearsals that has become legendary among dance analysis channels on YouTube. Dionysus is brutal. It's arguably the most physically exhausting BTS choreography ever created. Explosive jumps, aggressive formations, that iconic table jumping sequence at the end. During one of the early rehearsals, the choreography team demonstrated a particularly complex transition where members had to shift formations while executing a rapid arm and chest isolation combo. Most members needed the section broken down into 2 or 3 parts. Jungkook asked to see it one more time at full speed, stepped back, and then executed the entire transition in one go. Was it 100% perfect? No. Was it 90% there on the second attempt? Absolutely. And that is the Jungkook difference. He doesn't need the slow-motion breakdown that most learners rely on. He can process choreography at performance speed from almost the very beginning. But here's the nuance, and this is exactly why Jungkook is at number 5 and not higher up next to J-Hope and Jimin. While Jungkook learns the structure of choreography incredibly fast, the stylistic refinement takes him a bit longer than the two main dancers. What do I mean by that? Let me explain. Every choreography has two layers, the what and the how. The what is the actual sequence of moves, where your arms go, where your feet step, what direction you face, what count you hit. The how is the texture, the quality, the flavor. Is this move supposed to feel heavy or light? Is this isolation sharp or smooth? Is this body roll supposed to be aggressive or sensual? J-Hope and Jimin, because of their extensive specialized dance training, instinctively pick up both layers almost simultaneously. Jungkook locks in the what almost as fast as they do, but the how takes him extra reps to fully internalize. You can see this pattern if you watch early practice footage versus final stage performances. Jungkook's early practice versions are technically correct, but sometimes lack the specific movement quality the choreographer intended, and then by the time they hit the stage, he's polished it to near perfection. The gap exists, but it closes fast.
Number 4. BTS V. Okay. This is where the list starts getting really interesting because the member sitting at number 4, right in the middle of this ranking, is someone who, if you've only ever watched BTS performances on stage, you would never in a million years guess belongs in the harder to teach half of this list. We're talking about Taehyung, BTS's V, the man with the face that literally broke the internet, the deep-voiced king, the visual who moves on stage with such effortless charisma that fans have coined an entire term for his performance style, V-aura. And here's what makes his placement so genuinely fascinating. V is not a bad dancer. Let me say that again louder for the people in the back. V is not a bad dancer. On stage, he is captivating, magnetic, powerful, smooth, and overflowing with a natural stage presence that money cannot buy and training cannot manufacture. But learning new choreography, that's a completely different conversation. And the gap between how V looks performing a routine he's already mastered versus how he processes a brand new routine he's never seen before is one of the most intriguing stories in all of BTS's dance history. Let's start with the fundamental thing that separates V from the three members ranked below him. V is what dance educators would call an intuitive mover rather than a technical processor. What does that mean? It means that when V watches a choreographer demonstrate a new sequence, he doesn't break it down into counts, angles, and mechanics the way J-Hope does. He doesn't feel for the emotional weight first the way Jimin does. And he doesn't instantly replicate the physical shape the way Jungkook does. Instead, V absorbs the vibe. He watches the overall energy, the mood, the character of the movement, and then he tries to reproduce that feeling through his own body's natural vocabulary. And sometimes, when the choreography happens to align with his natural movement instincts, this works beautifully and he picks it up surprisingly fast. But other times, when the choreography demands very specific technical precision that doesn't match his body's default patterns, this approach creates a gap that requires extra time, extra reps, and extra coaching to close. This isn't speculation or fan theory. This is directly observable in years of behind-the-scenes content. Go watch any Bangtan Bomb or practice room video where BTS is learning a new routine and watch V carefully. You'll notice a very specific pattern. During the first few run-throughs, V often looks slightly off from the rest of the group. Not drastically wrong, but his timing might be a beat behind. His angles might be slightly different. His transitions might be smoother where they should be sharp, or sharper where they should be smooth. But then, something magical happens. After a certain number of repetitions, usually more than what J-Hope, Jimin, or Jungkook need, something clicks in V's body, and suddenly he's not just doing the choreography correctly, he's doing it with a flavor and a charisma that sometimes even outshines the members who learned it faster. It's like his body needs time to translate the choreography from its original form into V language, and once that translation is complete, the result is spectacular. Let's talk about a specific example that perfectly illustrates this. During the Blood, Sweat, and Tears era, one of BTS's most iconic and visually stunning comebacks, the choreography was heavily influenced by contemporary and modern dance, with lots of slow, controlled, sensual movement mixed with sudden bursts of sharpness. In early practice footage, you can see V struggling with some of the more technically demanding sections, particularly the moments that required very precise hand placement and isolated upper body movement. The choreographer had to work with him separately on a few specific 8 counts. But here's the twist. By the time they hit the stage for their live performances, V's execution of Blood, Sweat, and Tears was arguably the most captivating in the entire group. His natural sensuality, his facial expressions, his way of making every single gesture feel like it carried deep emotional meaning, it turned what were initially his weakest moments into his strongest ones. That transformation is pure V magic, and it's why reducing this conversation to just how fast do you learn misses the bigger picture. But we're specifically ranking learning speed here, so let's dig deeper into why V takes longer. A huge factor is his lack of formal dance training before joining Big Hit. Unlike J-Hope, who had years of street dance experience, unlike Jimin, who studied contemporary at an arts high school, and unlike Jungkook, who had natural kinesthetic genius plus intense trainee-era practice, V entered Big Hit primarily as a vocalist and actor-type talent. He was scouted partly for his visuals and vocal color, and dance was something he had to build from the ground up during his trainee period. And while he built it remarkably well enough to hold his own in the most synchronized performance group on Earth, that foundation isn't as deep as the 3 members ranked below him. When choreographers introduce movements rooted in specific dance techniques, a popping isolation, a locking sequence, a contemporary floor transition, J-Hope, Jimin, and Jungkook have existing neural pathways to connect those movements to. V has to build some of those pathways in real time, and that takes more repetitions.
Number 3. Suga. Alright, we are now officially past the halfway point of this list, and things are getting real. Because the member sitting at number 3, the third hardest BTS member to teach new choreography, is someone whose entire artistic identity was built in a world where dance didn't even exist as a requirement. We're talking about Min Yoongi, the one and only Suga, BTS's lead rapper, genius producer. The man who composed and produced hits that have moved millions of people to tears. The Taegu boy who walked into the Big Hit audition not because he wanted to be an idol, but because he wanted to make music. And here's the raw, unfiltered truth that Yoongi himself has talked about openly, repeatedly, and with a level of honesty that is genuinely rare in the K-pop industry. Dance was never part of his plan. Dancing was never in his vocabulary. Dancing was the thing that almost made him quit before BTS ever even debuted. And the fact that this man now stands on stages in front of hundreds of thousands of people, executing complex choreographies with a group known as one of the most synchronized in the world, that is not a story about natural talent. That is a story about sheer, brutal, jaw-dropping willpower. Let's go back to the very beginning, because understanding Suga's relationship with dance requires understanding where he came from. Before Big Hit, Yoongi was an underground rapper in Taegu. His world was beats, bars, wordplay, flow, delivery, and raw lyrical storytelling. He worked at a recording studio as a part-timer. He produced tracks for local artists. He studied music composition obsessively. His heroes were Nas, Eminem, Lil Wayne, and Epic High, lyricists and producers, not dancers. When he auditioned for Big Hit Entertainment, he auditioned as a rapper and producer. He submitted music. He performed verses. He showcased his ability to craft songs from scratch. At no point during that process did anyone say, "Oh, by the way, you're also going to need to learn extremely difficult choreography and perform it in perfect sync with 6 other people in front of millions." That conversation came after he was already accepted, and by multiple accounts, including Yoongi's own words in interviews and in his mixtape lyrics. It was a devastating reality check. Think about what that means for learning choreography. J-Hope had a decade of dance training before BTS. Jimin had years of contemporary education. Jungkook had natural kinesthetic intelligence. Even V, who also lacked formal training, had youth on his side and a naturally expressive body. Suga walked into that practice room with essentially zero movement foundation. His body hadn't been trained to isolate muscles. His muscle memory bank for dance was empty. His sense of rhythm was incredible. He's a musician, after all, but translating rhythmic understanding from your ears to your limbs is a completely different neurological process than most people realize. You can feel a beat perfectly in your head and still have your body lag behind by a fraction of a second because the motor pathways between your brain and your muscles haven't been conditioned for dance-specific movement. And this is where the story gets genuinely emotional, because the behind-the-scenes footage from BTS's trainee era and early debut days paints a picture of Suga that is heartbreakingly honest. In multiple documentaries, including Burn the Stage and Early Bangtan Bombs, you can see Yoongi in the practice room looking frustrated, not angry at anyone else, but angry at himself. Angry that his body won't cooperate. Angry that moves which seem to click for other members after a few run-throughs take him dozens of repetitions to lock in. There's a well-known story from the trainee period where Yoongi stayed in the practice room until 4 or 5 in the morning, running the same choreography section over and over again until his legs physically couldn't support him anymore. Not because anyone forced him to, but because Min Yoongi does not accept failure. His pride as a professional, his commitment to BTS as a team, his refusal to be the weak link. All of that drove him to push through a learning process that was fundamentally harder for him than for almost anyone else in the group. Let's talk specifically about why Suga finds new choreography challenging from a technical standpoint, because it's more nuanced than just he's not a dancer. First, there's the issue of physical build and flexibility. Yoongi has a compact, lean frame with naturally tight shoulders and an upper body that doesn't have the loose, fluid range of motion that makes dance transitions look smooth. He's talked about his shoulder injury from a car accident during his trainee days, which further limited his upper body mobility for a significant period. When choreographers introduce moves that require wide arm extensions, rolling shoulders, or fluid upper body waves, Yoongi's body has to work harder to achieve the same range of motion that other members reach more naturally. It's not impossible. He does it, but it takes additional stretching, warming up, and repetition to get his muscles to cooperate. Second, and this is something that dance educators would immediately recognize, Suga's natural movement quality tends toward what's called bound flow rather than free flow. In movement analysis terms, bound flow means your muscles naturally hold tension and resist movement, creating a controlled, tight quality. Free flow means your muscles naturally release and allow movement to travel freely through the body. Most dance choreography requires constant switching between bound and free flow. Sharp hit, smooth transition, explosive burst, gentle wave, and people whose bodies naturally default to one end of the spectrum have to consciously override their instincts to achieve the other. Suga's body defaults to bound flow, which means sharp, percussive movements actually come relatively easier to him. Watch him during Mic Drop or Dope. He looks great because those choreographies are aggressive and punchy, but smooth, flowing, sensual choreographies require significantly more effort and learning time. Black Swan and Fake Love were reportedly much harder for him than Fire, or Not Today for exactly this reason. Third, and this is the factor that people underestimate the most, Suga's mental processing of choreography is fundamentally different from the dance-trained members. J-Hope processes choreography through body memory. He sees it, his body knows it. Jimin processes through emotional connection. He feels it, his body expresses it. Jungkook processes through athletic mimicry. He watches it, his body copies it. Suga processes choreography almost intellectually. He breaks it down like he would break down a musical composition, analyzing the structure, counting the beats, mentally mapping each movement to a specific rhythmic position. This methodical, analytical approach works, but it's slower than intuitive body processing because there's an extra cognitive step between seeing the move and executing it. His body has to wait for his brain to finish calculating before it can act. Over the years, as he's accumulated more dance experience, some movements have shifted from conscious processing to muscle memory, but for genuinely new moves that don't match anything he's done before, that analytical step still creates a noticeable delay. But here's where I need to stop and give Min Yoongi the absolute respect he deserves, because despite all of these challenges, despite the lack of training, despite the physical limitations, despite the injury history, despite every single odd being stacked against him, this man has performed flawless choreography on the biggest stages in the world for over a decade. He performed Idol at the United Nations General Assembly. He performed Butter at the Grammys. He performed Yet to Come in front of tens of thousands in Busan. And not once, did he look like someone who didn't belong there. Because what Suga lacks in natural dance learning speed, he makes up for with something that is arguably more impressive, an absolutely relentless work ethic and a refusal to let any challenge defeat him. He practices longer than almost anyone. He asks J-Hope and Jimin for extra help without a shred of ego. He films himself practicing and reviews the footage to identify his own weaknesses. He approaches dance the same way he approaches producing music, with meticulous attention to detail, tireless repetition, and a standard of excellence that accepts nothing less than his absolute best. There's a moment in Break the Silence that encapsulates everything about Suga and dance. He's sitting in the practice room after everyone else has left, sweat dripping down his face, replaying a choreography video on his phone and marking through the moves one more time. And he looks at the camera and says something along the lines of, "Dance will never be easy for me, but that doesn't mean I can stop trying." That single sentence tells you everything you need to know about why Min Yoongi is one of the most respected artists in the world. Not because everything comes naturally, but because he fights for every single thing that doesn't. So Suga at number 3, the underground rapper who was never supposed to dance, whose body was never trained for it, who battles physical limitations and a processing style that works against speed, and yet who has never let any of that stop him from delivering on stage. The hardest to teach? Maybe. The hardest working? Absolutely. Now, number 2 and number 1 are still ahead, and trust me, the top 2 spots on this list feature members whose stories with dance are even more dramatic, even more emotional, and even more deeply personal than anything we've covered so far. The next member's journey will genuinely make you rethink what it means to be a performer. Ready? Let's keep going. Number 2, Jin. We are so close to the top of this list, and if you've been paying attention, if you've been watching BTS with more than just casual eyes, you probably had a feeling this member was going to land here. At number 2, the second hardest BTS member to teach new dance moves is Kim Seokjin, the eldest Hyung, the worldwide handsome, the man whose face could literally launch 1,000 ships, but whose body, by his own repeated and brutally honest admission, has spent over a decade fighting a silent, exhausting, deeply personal battle against choreography. And let me tell you something right now before we even dive into the details. Jin's story at this spot on the list is not a story of weakness. It is not a story of failure. It is, without exaggeration, one of the most quietly heroic stories in the entire history of K-pop, because what this man has endured, sacrificed, and overcome just to keep up, not to be the best dancer, not to steal the spotlight, just to keep up, is something that would have broken most people 10 times over. Let's rewind to where it all started, because Jin's path to BTS is unlike anyone else's in the group, and it sets the stage for everything that follows. Kim Seokjin was a student at Konkuk University, majoring in acting and film. Acting. Not music, not dance, not performance. Acting. He was walking down the street one day when a big-hit entertainment casting agent saw him, chased him down, and offered him an audition based purely on his visuals. That's the origin story. No dance background whatsoever. No musical training. No performance experience. No rhythm training. No stage experience. Nothing. Zero. Absolute blank canvas. He walked into Big Hit Entertainment as quite possibly the most raw, untrained recruit in the company's history, and he was immediately thrown into a trainee environment surrounded by people like J-Hope, who had been dancing competitively for years, and Jungkook, who could pick up any physical skill in minutes. Imagine that. Imagine being the oldest person in the room, which in Korean culture means you carry the weight of being the Hyung, the one who's supposed to set the example, and you're the one who can't keep up. The trainee period was, by Jin's own account, absolutely brutal. In multiple interviews, in BTS's documentaries, in his solo V-Lives late at night, when he'd open up to Army about his struggles, Jin has described those early years with a level of raw vulnerability that is shocking for a K-pop idol. He's talked about being in the practice room and watching the choreographer demonstrate a sequence, and while other trainees would start moving, his body would just freeze. Not because he was lazy, not because he wasn't paying attention, but because the neurological connection between watching a movement and reproducing it with his body simply did not exist yet. His brain would understand what the move was supposed to look like, but when he sent the signal to his limbs, the translation got scrambled. Arms going the wrong direction, feet stepping on the wrong beat. hips rotating when they should be still. Every single basic element of dance that train members took for granted was a mountain for Jin to climb from absolute zero. And here's the detail that makes this even more painful. Jin wasn't just learning dance in general, he was learning idol-level choreography, which is among the most demanding, most precise, most unforgiving forms of dance on the planet. K-pop choreography isn't like dancing at a club where you can vibe and freestyle and nobody cares if your arm is 10 degrees off. K-pop choreography requires exact synchronization with multiple other performers, down to the angle of your fingers, the tilt of your head, the precise millisecond your foot hits the floor. When you're in a group of 7 and 6 of them are moving in perfect unison, even the smallest deviation from one member becomes glaringly obvious. And for the first several years of BTS's career, Jin was constantly, painfully aware that he was the member most likely to be that deviation. Not because he didn't try. God knows he tried harder than almost anyone. But because his starting point was so far behind everyone else's that the gap took years of brutal, daily grinding to close. Let's talk about the specific challenges Jin faces when learning new choreography, because they go deeper than just he started late. First, there's the issue of body type and natural flexibility. Jin has broad shoulders, famously broad, legendarily broad, the kind of shoulders that make him look incredible in a suit, but that create genuine challenges in dance. Broad shoulders increase your moment of inertia during rotational movements, meaning turns, spins, and any choreography that requires quick directional changes take more physical effort and more precise control. Additionally, Jin has talked about having naturally tight hip flexors and limited lower body flexibility compared to members like Jimin or J-Hope, which affects his ability to execute low-level choreography, deep squats, and fluid hip movements that are staples of modern K-pop dance. Second, there's the age factor, and before anyone accuses me of being ageist, this is pure neuroscience. Jin is the oldest member of BTS, and he started serious dance training later than everyone else. The brain's neuroplasticity, its ability to form new motor pathways quickly, is highest during childhood and adolescence, and it gradually decreases with age. J-Hope started dancing as a child, when his brain was a sponge for physical learning. Jimin trained intensively as a teenager. Even Jungkook, who joined Big Hit at 13, was still in the peak window of motor learning. Jin began his dance training at around 19 or 20, which is past the prime window for building dance-specific neural pathways from scratch. This doesn't mean he can't learn. He obviously can and has. But it means each new choreography requires more repetitions to achieve the same level of muscle memory that younger trained members achieve with fewer reps. It's not about effort or desire. It's about the biological clock of neurological development, and Jin has been fighting against that clock his entire career. Third, and this is something Jin himself has been remarkably open about, he struggles with what psychologists call performance anxiety feedback loops, specifically related to dance. Here's how it works. Jin knows he's not the strongest dancer. That knowledge creates anxiety when new choreography is introduced. That anxiety creates physical tension in his body. That tension makes his movements stiff and less fluid. That stiffness makes the choreography look worse. Seeing it look worse increases his anxiety. And the cycle repeats. Breaking out of this loop requires not just physical practice, but mental conditioning. And Jin has worked with the group and with professionals to manage this over the years. In later eras, you can visibly see him more relaxed during practice sessions compared to early years, and that mental progress has directly translated into faster learning speeds. But the loop never fully disappears. It's always there in the background, adding an extra layer of difficulty to every single new routine. Now, let's talk about the incredible evolution of Jin as a dancer, because this is where the story transforms from challenging to genuinely inspiring. Literally go pull up the videos and compare. Jin's dancing in No More Dream from 2013 to his dancing in Butter from 2021. The difference is staggering. In the early days, Jin's movements were visibly stiffer, his timing was occasionally off by fractions of a beat, and his expressions during dance-heavy sections often showed concentration rather than performance energy. By the Butter era, Jin is smooth, confident, charismatic, hitting moves with a relaxed swagger that you would never associate with someone who once described himself as the member who can't dance. That transformation didn't happen by accident. It happened because Kim Seokjin spent thousands of hours in practice rooms, often staying hours after official rehearsals ended, often coming in hours before they started, often practicing alone in his room at night using reflection in the window as a mirror. And here's a detail that genuinely breaks my heart and fills it with admiration at the same time. J-Hope has talked about how, during the early and middle years, he would often find Jin practicing alone in the Big Hit building late at night. Not because anyone asked him to, not because there was a performance coming up, but because Jin felt guilty that his dance level might be holding the group back. Let that sink in. This man, who is one of the most successful entertainers on earth, who has brought joy and laughter and comfort to millions of people worldwide, felt guilty because he couldn't execute a body roll as smoothly as Jimin. That pressure, the self-imposed pressure of an eldest brother who feels responsible for the group's collective excellence, drove Jin to practice with an intensity that other members have described as almost scary. Jungkook once said in an interview that he's never seen anyone work as hard at something they find difficult as Jin works at dance. There's one more thing that deserves to be highlighted, and it's something that elevates Jin beyond just a hard worker into a genuinely smart performer. Over the years, Jin developed his own strategy for overcoming his dance learning challenges. He turned his perceived weaknesses into entertainment. When he couldn't nail a move perfectly, he'd add a comedic flair to it. When he knew a section was going to be tough for him, he'd compensate with facial expressions so entertaining that the audience wouldn't even notice the technical imperfection. He turned his flying kiss into a signature move that fans anticipate more than any choreographed step. He made his broad shoulders a feature, not a bug, by adding exaggerated shoulder movements during performances that became iconic moments. Jin didn't just learn to dance. He learned to perform around the dance, creating a stage presence that is uniquely, unmistakably, unforgettably his. So Jin at number 2. The man who walked into an entertainment company with zero dance ability, who fought through years of physical limitations, late neurological development, anxiety, self-doubt, and the crushing pressure of being the eldest member in the world's biggest group, and who still showed up every single day, practiced until his body gave out, and delivered performances that made millions of people fall in love with him. That is not a weakness. That is one of the greatest displays of determination in modern entertainment. But we still have one more spot to reveal. Number 1. The hardest BTS member to teach new dance moves. And if you think you know who it is, you might be right. But the reasons behind it? Those are going to hit different. Let's finish this. Number 1, RM. Here we are. The top of the mountain. The final spot. Number 1. The BTS member who is officially, undeniably, legendarily the hardest to teach new dance moves. And honestly, if you're a true ARMY, if you've been following BTS for any significant amount of time, if you've watched the Bangtan Bombs, the behind-the-scenes documentaries, the practice room footage, the Run BTS episodes where dance challenges turn into comedy gold, you knew this was coming. The man sitting at the absolute pinnacle of this list is none other than Kim Namjoon, BTS's RM, the leader, the visionary, the lyrical genius with a verified IQ of 148, the man who taught himself English by watching Friends, who has delivered speeches at the United Nations, who has been called one of the most important cultural figures of the 21st century by Time magazine, and who, by his own gleefully self-deprecating admission, has been waging an epic, legendary, sometimes hilarious, often painful, always deeply human war against choreography since the very first day he stepped foot in a Big Hit practice room. And let me be crystal clear about something before we go any further. This is not a roast. This is not a joke. This is not, let's make fun of RM for not being able to dance. What this truly is arguably the most inspiring story on this entire list, because Kim Namjoon represents something profoundly important. The idea that you can be the absolute best at what you do, leading, writing, speaking, thinking, creating, and still have something that challenges you every single day, something that humbles you, something that reminds you that being human means being imperfect. And the way Namjoon has handled that imperfection, with humor, with honesty, with relentless effort, and with zero excuses, is a masterclass in leadership that has nothing to do with dance and everything to do with character. So let's start with the big question. Why is RM the hardest member to teach new choreography? And the answer is layered, complex, and genuinely fascinating from both a neurological and a biographical standpoint. First, let's address the elephant in the room, RM's brain. That legendary 148 IQ, polyglot, philosophy reading, art collecting, poetry writing brain. You'd think having an incredibly powerful brain would help with dance learning, right? More processing power, faster analysis, quicker comprehension? In reality, the opposite can be true, and RM is a textbook example of a phenomenon that neuroscientists and movement specialists have documented extensively, the overthinking trap. When someone with an extremely analytical mind tries to learn a physical skill, their brain tends to overprocess the information. Instead of letting the body learn through feel and repetition, the analytical brain tries to consciously control every single aspect of the movement simultaneously. Okay, left foot steps here on count 2. Right arm extends at this angle. Head turns 15 degrees to the right. Weight shifts to the back foot. Chest pops forward on the in-count. And by the time the brain has finished computing all of those variables, the music has moved on by 3 beats and the body is frozen in cognitive overload. This is not a guess or a fan theory. You can literally see this happening in practice room footage. Watch any behind-the-scenes video where BTS is learning new choreography and watch RM's face during the first few run-throughs. While other members' faces show varying degrees of focus or relaxation, RM's face often shows intense concentration, furrowed brows, eyes darting back and forth, lips sometimes moving as if he's counting or talking himself through the sequence. His brain is working overtime trying to manually compute every variable of the movement, while members like J-Hope and Jungkook have already bypassed that conscious processing and are operating on intuitive body intelligence. It's like the difference between a manual transmission and an automatic. RM is manually shifting through every gear while others are cruising on autopilot. Both get you to the destination, but one requires significantly more effort and attention. And here's where RM's story intersects with his background in a way that's deeply revealing. Like Suga, Namjoon entered the world of entertainment as a rapper. His pre-big hit life was all about words, lyrics, underground hip-hop, and intellectual expression. He was performing at underground rap battles in Ilsan as a teenager. He was writing poetry and lyrics in notebooks. He was studying language, philosophy, and literature. His entire identity, his sense of self-worth, his creative expression, his connection to art, was built through his mind, not his body. Dance was not just absent from his life. It was from an entirely different universe. When he joined Big Hit and was told that being an idol meant dancing, intense, complex, synchronized dancing, it was like asking a chess grandmaster to suddenly compete in gymnastics. The intellectual hardware is extraordinary, but the physical software hasn't been installed. Now let's talk about the specific physical challenges, because they are real and they are significant. RM is the tallest member of BTS at approximately 181 centimeters. We talked about how V's height creates longer lever arms that make precise movements harder. Multiply that effect for RM, who is even taller with notably long limbs. His arms and legs have to travel farther to hit the same positions, which means more room for error, more momentum to control, and more physical effort to achieve sharp, clean lines. But height alone doesn't explain everything. Multiple choreographers and movement analysts who have studied BTS's practice footage have pointed out that RM has what dancers call delayed proprioceptive feedback, meaning the signals between his brain and his extremities travel slightly slower than optimal for dance speed movements. When a choreographer says, "Hit this move on count 3," RM's brain sends the signal, but his body arrives at the position a fraction of a beat late. Over an entire choreography, those fractions accumulate into visible timing differences that require extensive drilling to correct. There's also the coordination factor, and RM has been legendarily honest about this. In countless interviews, V-Lives, and behind-the-scenes moments, Namjoon has joked about his own coordination with a humor that is both endearing and slightly heartbreaking. He's the member who trips over flat surfaces. He's the member who breaks things by merely touching them, earning him the nickname, god of destruction. He's the member who, in Run BTS episodes involving physical challenges, turns simple tasks into slapstick comedy, not because he's performing for the camera, but because his body genuinely seems to have a mind of its own. And while this is hilarious and has become one of the most beloved aspects of his personality, it's rooted in a real coordination gap that directly affects his dance learning. When other members can pat their head and rub their stomach simultaneously without thinking, RM's brain has to consciously allocate processing power to each task, and dance choreography is essentially the ultimate multitasking challenge. Different rhythms in different limbs, all at high speed, all while moving through space, all while maintaining facial expressions and stage presence. Let's talk about specific moments, because the RM dance learning saga has produced some of the most iconic behind-the-scenes content in BTS's history. During the Fire era, a high-energy, fast-paced choreography that required explosive power and razor-sharp timing. There is practice room footage where RM is visibly struggling with a rapid footwork sequence that other members have already locked in. J-Hope is standing next to him, patiently demonstrating the sequence at half speed, then three-quarter speed, then full speed, over and over and over again. And RM keeps trying, keeps getting closer, keeps making tiny improvements with each repetition. In the Idol era, there's a famous Bangtan bomb where the choreographer is teaching a traditional Korean dance-inspired sequence, and RM's body is doing approximately the right shapes, but at the wrong times, creating this almost comedic offset that even he can't help laughing at. But notice, he's laughing, not giving up. He's cracking jokes about his own struggles, defusing the tension, making the practice room lighter for everyone, and then immediately going back to drilling the section again. That is leadership. And speaking of leadership, this is the part of RM's story that elevates it from member who struggles with dance to something genuinely profound. Kim Namjoon is the leader of BTS. He is the person who holds the group together emotionally, creatively, and professionally. He is the one who speaks at press conferences, who mediates conflicts, who sets the artistic direction, who writes the songs that give the group its soul. And every single time he walks into that practice room, he has to confront the fact that the thing the group is about to do, perform choreography, is the thing he is worst at. Can you imagine the psychological weight of that? Being the captain of the ship and knowing that the specific activity you're about to do together is your biggest vulnerability? Most leaders would crumble under that pressure, or they'd try to hide their weakness, or they'd use their authority to avoid the hardest parts. Namjoon does the opposite. He puts himself front and center. He practices the longest. He asks for the most help. He makes his struggle visible to his members, not to gain sympathy, but to show them that it's okay to struggle, that it's okay to be bad at something, that what matters is not being the best, it's giving your best. J-Hope, BTS's dance leader, the person most responsible for helping members learn choreography, has spoken about RM's learning process with a level of respect that borders on reverence. In interviews and behind-the-scenes content, J-Hope has described how RM will practice a single 8-count section 50, 60, 70 times until it's locked in. Not because anyone asks him to, not because someone is watching, but because his standard for himself won't allow him to walk onto that stage knowing he hasn't given absolutely everything. J-Hope has also noted that RM's learning speed has genuinely improved over the years. That moves which would have taken him an entire day to learn in 2013 now take him a few hours. That improvement represents thousands of hours of accumulated practice, thousands of hours of building neural pathways that his body never had before, thousands of hours of slowly, painstakingly, stubbornly teaching his body a language it was never designed to speak. And here's the final piece of the puzzle, the detail that makes RM's #1 placement not just understandable, but deeply moving. Despite being the hardest member to teach, despite needing the most time, despite facing every physical and neurological disadvantage on this list, Kim Namjoon has never missed a single choreography. Not one. Not in over a decade. Every single BTS dance, from No More Dream, to Butter, to Yet to Come, RM has learned it, performed it, and delivered it on the world's biggest stages. Not perfectly, sure. Not with the fluidity of J-Hope or the grace of Jimin. But completely. Fully. Without compromise and without excuses. He once said in an interview, and I'm paraphrasing but the sentiment is exact, I may never be a great dancer, but I can be a great performer, and I owe it to the members and to Army to give everything I have every single time. That's not just a quote. That's a philosophy. That's a man who looked at his biggest weakness, acknowledged it with total honesty, and then said, I'm going to show up anyway. So RM at number 1, the hardest BTS member to teach new dance moves. The genius whose brain processes language, philosophy, and music at an extraordinary level, but whose body has spent a decade catching up. The leader who turns his vulnerability into strength, his struggle into inspiration, and his imperfection into the most human, most relatable, most real thing about the biggest group on the planet. Kim Namjoon doesn't dance because it's easy. He dances because his team needs him. And that, more than any perfect choreography, more than any flawless performance, is what makes him legendary.
And there it is, folks. The complete ranking from number 7 all the way down to number 1. J-Hope, the dance machine who downloads choreography like breathing. Jimin, the contemporary prince whose perfectionism turns every move into art. Jungkook, the golden maknae who defies logic with raw physical genius. V, the stage king whose charisma transforms struggle into spectacle. Sugar, the underground rapper who built a dancer's body through pure willpower. Jin, the worldwide handsome who fought a silent war against every beat and won. And RM, the genius leader who proves every single day that showing up with your whole heart matters more than being the best in the room. But here's the thing. Here's the real takeaway that this entire list has been building toward. None of this ranking matters when they hit that stage together. Because when those 7 men stand in formation, when the music drops, when the lights explode, and 80,000 people scream their names, you don't see 7 individuals with different learning speeds. You see one unit, one heartbeat, one synchronized, unstoppable, breathtaking force that has changed the entire landscape of global entertainment. The member who learns in 5 minutes and the member who learns in 5 hours end up in the same place, on that stage, giving everything, leaving nothing behind. And that is what separates BTS from everyone else. It was never about who's the best dancer. It was never about who picks up moves the fastest. It was always about 7 people who refused to let each other fail. 7 people who stayed late for each other, who taught each other, who picked each other up off that practice room floor and said, one more time. We do it one more time. So the next time you watch a BTS performance and marvel at how perfectly in sync they are, remember this. That synchronization wasn't free. It was earned, beat by beat, rep by rep, tier by tier, by 7 men who chose each other every single day for over a decade. And that, my friends, is not just a ranking. That's a love story written in sweat. Thank you for watching. Drop your thoughts in the comments, smash that like button, and we'll see you in the next one.